Hey everyone, it's Ornlu, and it's time for another part of the State of the Civs 2023. So for those who are new or have not seen the first segment, State of the Civs is a short series I do around the start of a new year, where we take a holistic look at all of the civilizations in AoE2 right now, assessing not just how balanced they are, but how cohesive is their design. Basically, do these civs feel like a natural part of the AoE2 roster? Are they unique? Do they have situations where they shine and situations where they struggle? Do their bonuses feel gimmicky or out of place? That sort of thing. In an attempt to quantify these fairly nebulous concepts, as well as to keep track of all the different civs in the game, we're going to place everybody on a modified tier list. I explained what I mean by the different tiers in the first part, so be sure to check it out if you haven't seen it yet. In addition, because there are 42 civs in AoE2 right now, instead of making super long videos where I cover a ton at once, I'm spreading things out this year by only doing 6 civs per part for a total of 7 videos. Of course, this is episode 2, and since we're going in alphabetical order, today we will be assessing the Burgundians, Burmese, Byzantines, Celts, Chinese, and Cumans. Lastly, if you are excited for this breakdown, be sure to leave a like on the video, comment on what you think of the civs we cover, and subscribe to the channel for tons more AoE2 content. With our introductory logistics complete, let's jump right back into the reviews. We start things off with the least controversial civilization in all of Age of Empires 2, the Burgundians, who hail from the Lords of the West expansion. Burgundians are classified as a cavalry civilization in-game, although I would probably add economy to that designation as well. Compared to their francophone sister, the Franks, Burgundians are far more focused on economy, timings, and finesse with their units. The cheaper and early economy upgrades is one of the strongest eco bonuses out there, and although the extra resource investment early on slows you down in the short run, the mid-run payoff is absolutely enormous. Burgundians also get to keep up with that economic advantage throughout the game with their relics generating extra food and their farmers generating extra gold, and that ensures that they have the resource advantage at most stages. This theme of tech discounts also applies to their military, as the cheaper stable upgrades plus cavalier available one age earlier defines the civilization militarily. Then, to round things out, the strong gunpowder ensures that you have non-cavalry options in the late game as well. Now, in theory, Burgundians counter this economic and technological strength with some key limitations in their tech tree. Missing bloodlines or a comparable HP bonus makes their cavalry the opposite of Franks. It's easier to get your upgrades, but the units themselves are lacking in HP. That said, last year I placed Burgundians in the somewhat problematic tier. Their identity and flavor totally make sense, with the economy and technology focus serving as a nice counterpart to the Franks. Unfortunately, the implementation of the civ has issues. Power level wise, the civilization feels way too good economically on most land maps, especially closed ones. A strong economy plus cheaper technology leads to timings that can be a bit too difficult for other civs to keep up with. Still, those issues feel like they can be fixed with some numbers tweaking. What cannot be so easily dealt with is the design of the Coustier unique unit and the dreaded button. Coustier, I think, can work in theory with the idea of a more finesse-focused medium cavalry unit slotting into the Burgundian army quite nicely. I just don't like the idea of the charge mechanic. This is entirely just my opinion, but unit special abilities for things that aren't monks just don't really feel like AoE2. It also leads the unit to be really snowbally, which isn't great either. Then there is the button, also known as Flemish Revolution. I honestly don't think there is much to say about this upgrade that hasn't been said 100 times already by basically every content creator and high-level player I know. This tech is just insanely gimmicky, snowbally, uninteractive, and again, not AoE2. Still, in the past year, Burgundians did receive a couple of nice balance changes. The cost discount for their economy upgrades was reduced from 50% to 40%, and the Coustier charge attack was reduced by 5 damage. Balance-wise, I think these were steps in the right direction, although not enough. There's certainly not enough for me to bump Burgundians out of the somewhat problematic tier, as those core issues still remain. Burgundians really have some nice flavor, and getting them to fit more as an AoE2 civ doesn't feel hopeless, but we still have a ways to go with these guys. Second up today is going to be another not remotely divisive civilization, the Burmese, who were introduced to the game in the Rise of the Rajas expansion. In-game, Burmese were classified as an elephant and monk civilization, which certainly makes sense. Their battle elephants have extra armor and can become very difficult to take down without proper counter units. However, they're still battle elephants, and those are fundamentally situational units. Thankfully, Burmese have other options that can be quite potent. Their extra attack for infantry and free lumber camp upgrades give the Burmese a ton of aggressive strength, supplemented by their powerful monks and a Rambai unique unit in the mid-game. Access to bombard cannons, hussars, and halberdiers help round out their late game when gold runs low, so like Khmer and unlike Bengalis, Burmese are an elephant civ that has strong non-elephant options, which both gives them them a more distinct flavor and really helps out balance-wise. All of this makes Burmese out to be a well-rounded civ, and to some extent they are, but the critical weakness is the lack of the leather archer armor upgrade, aka +2 defense for archers. Burmese are the only civ to miss this upgrade, and to some extent they are designed around it. In a practical sense, missing the +2 defense gives Burmese a decisive weakness to strong archer civilizations, as skirmishers that miss those defensive upgrades end up not countering archers as well as they need to, particularly in the mid-game. Sure, things are fine once you get a bunch of extra armored battle elephants in the late game, but it's just so difficult to ever get there. Primarily for those reasons, last year I ended up placing Burmese all the way down in the major changes needed tier. That weakness to archers is just so baked into the civ design that with the lack of the critical leather archer armor tech, it just becomes very difficult to help the civ versus archers while still retaining that general weakness. For example, if you just give them the upgrade, not only do you remove that unique aspect of the civilization, I think Burmese just become overpowered as they have way too many strong options. We don't want this to become another Portuguese situation where a mediocre civ gets a small change that removes a key weakness, suddenly launching them into the top tier on most maps. But beyond the archer weakness, Burmese still have occasional showings in tournaments, and they remain a decent option on closed maps and nomad style maps. One of the running jokes in the AoE2 community is how every patch has a change to the Burmese, as the devs struggle to find a way to make the civ play it more smoothly. And indeed, the civ got changed in 2 of the 3 balance patches last year. In April, Burmese gained a bonus where their battle elephants gain +1/+1 armor on top of the rebalance +1/+1 of the Howdah unique tech. This makes elephant play stronger at all stages of the game, but especially in early Castle Age where they better deal with archers. They also got some small buffs to the cost of Manipur cavalry and the train time of Arambai. Then, later in the year, Burmese got another Arambai change where they now benefit from Parthian tactics, basically enabling the unit to get another +1/+2 armor. So where does all of that leave Burmese now? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. The elephant changes have gone mostly untested at higher levels as the unit is just so hard to get going, and the Arambai changes still feel quite new. I do like the direction the civ is going, however, although I haven't really seen enough evidence that Burmese belong in a tier higher than major changes needed. The civ certainly could move up without any more changes if they got more figured out, but as it stands right now, we really don't see these guys as a priority pick in most settings. Next, we turn to an old classic, one of the original Age of Kings civs, the Byzantines. These guys were the first, and for a long time only, civilization to earn the classification defensive, and that designation is about as spot on as it gets. Byzantines are all about weathering the opponent's attacks with efficient counter units. Their most iconic bonuses are their extra building HP and cheaper counter units, which are the main tools the civ has to make up for their lack of economy bonus. That said, free building line of sight upgrades and faster healing monks both help out in smaller ways and fit the civ's identity. Another memorable aspect of this civ is their tech tree, which is the single broadest in all of AoE2. Of course, this all comes at the cost of an economy bonus like I just mentioned, as well as specific powerful upgrades such as Bloodlines, Blast Furnace, Siege Onager, and Siege Engineers. The emphasis here is clearly efficiency, not raw power. The exception to this rule is the mighty Cataphract unique unit, whose ability to better deal with traditional cavalry counters and status as a heavy cavalry unit itself have made it a fan favorite for decades. Lastly, one of the main selling points for the Byzantines, especially in tournament settings, is their strength on water and hybrid maps. The faster attacking fire ships is one of the best bonuses for early game water, as their fire galleys simply get to beat every other ship's fire galleys in a straight up fight. Byzantines have received several small changes in the past, but even by last year I was already putting this civ in the complete tier. I am far from the first person to label this civ as the jack of all trades and master of none, and for good reason. Byzantines always have a place in the metagame. They are at least decent in basically every conceivable setting, and very strong in a few scenarios. The second part is actually quite important, because if Byzantines were only a bit above average everywhere, then they wouldn't really be picked. Case in point, just look at the Sicilians. In the past year, Byzantines only received one noticeable balance change in the addition of Treadmill Crane to their tech tree, which, for those who don't know, is entirely targeted at deathmatch balance for reasons I won't get into here. Of course, it's not like Byzantines needed many changes, and I would go so far as to say that this civilization probably possesses more even matchups than any other in the game. Some people might say that a civ that is at least viable everywhere is too good, but in the case of Byzantines, they rarely if ever feel oppressive. That, plus their unique identity, are as good of hallmarks for a complete tier civ as it gets. If you're looking for another classic Age of Kings civ, look no further than our next entry, the Celts. Each of the original Western European civs represent a different core archetype, with Britons doing archers, Franks doing cavalry, and Celts doing infantry and siege, which is naturally their designation by the tech tree. These guys are all about speed and brute strength, starting with your economy bonus being one of the most generally applicable boosts out there, as literally every strategy has you chopping wood throughout the game. This lets Celts get off to the races quickly, allowing them to go for a strong drush or men-at-arms rush play on a very open map, or even go for a fast castle into forward siege workshops with monks and knights, much like a certain unnamed player likes to do. But of course, you aren't limited to infantry early on, as the faster lumberjacks help quite a bit in an archer rush. However, once you get past early Castle Age with Celts, things start to become tricky, as the weakness of this civ has always been the late Castle Age and early Imperial Age. Missing bloodlines for cavalry and almost all late-game archer techs means that Celts, perhaps more than any other infantry civ, must truly make a switch over to infantry themselves as the game develops. However, if you can survive that hurdle, Celts become very strong once again in the late game, as speedy infantry and supercharged siege can muscle your way through most army compositions. Last year, I placed Celts in the almost there tier for their foundational identity as an infantry and siege civilization, being above average on a variety of map types and especially good on maps like Black Forest. I also want to reinforce the unique situation of Celts in the late Castle Age and early Imperial Age, as that time when Celts are having to tech switch into infantry and siege from cavalry and archers is when they are most vulnerable, and that feels pretty unique. When it comes to why I didn't put them in the complete tier, well, that would be the fault of their stronghold unique tech. Faster firing castles and towers sounds a lot nicer than it actually is, as the Celts' lack of bracer means your defenses are generally mediocre regardless. Now, to my knowledge, Celts are the single least changed civ in all of AoE2, at least as far as the original AOC civs go. That trend continues this year, where Celts received no direct balance adjustments. Considering that and the general state of Celts in the metagame, I would continue to place them in the almost there tier, mostly because of strongholds. The only other gripe I have with this civ is that maybe they fall a bit short on open maps these days compared to where they used to be, but I feel like replacing strongholds with a more useful unique tech that could help that transition into the late game would go a long way into making the Celts feel complete. The Age of King civilizations just don't stop dropping, as we now turn to the Chinese. In-game, they are classified as an archer civilization, and yes, they have good archers, but I would characterize their playstyle as more of an economy civilization. This civ has a whopping 4 economy bonuses, most notable of which is their start. You get 3 extra villagers, but at the cost of a quarter of your typical starting wood and all of your regular starting food. This makes Chinese difficult to play for newer players, as you really need to optimize your first minute or so of gameplay to minimize your idle TC time. However, you do get extra TC population space and line of sight, so that process is made easier. If you master their start, which is not difficult to do after a little bit of practice, you'll find yourself 2-ish villagers ahead of your opponent in standard settings as you reach the feudal age. This already gives you more resources to play with, and then the other economic bonuses of Chinese can kick in, your cheaper technologies and extra farm food. These bonuses all combine to give this civ a solid leg up over most civilizations in the feudal and castle age, which is why Chinese are so popular on open maps. Militarily, Chinese are famous for their broad tech tree, as you can efficiently go for archers, cavalry, or infantry, depending on what the situation calls for. That said, none of these regular units stand out in terms of raw strength, but that's where the Chukonu unique unit comes in. These rapid-fire archers give the civilization some much-needed oomph and help round out the Chinese late game alongside siege rams and bombard towers. Of course, the Chinese miss redemption for their monks as well as bombard cannons, so powerful late-game siege is often the key way to deal with this civ. A year ago, I ended up placing Chinese in the complete tier, as their start, economy in general, and their well-upgraded and diverse armies all feel quite distinct. I will concede that Chinese are a powerful option on most open maps, but kind of like Aztecs, I don't think they fall outside the realm of balanced. Chinese can function well in team games, but struggle on nomad and closed maps. All of these dynamics point towards a civilization with notable strengths and weaknesses. As the Chinese are pretty cohesive and balanced in general, it is no surprise that they have received no direct balance changes over the past year. They remain a popular choice in tournaments in a variety of settings, but not to the point where we see them banned at every opportunity. You do need to approach the game a bit differently with the Chinese, but they are going to be a rewarding civ to play once you get the hang of them. Obviously, the Chinese were in the complete tier last year and received no balance changes this year, so the civ will continue to stick in the top spot for 2023. We end today with another last con civ, this time being the Cumans. These guys are classified as a cavalry civilization by the tech tree, but taking it a step further, Cumans are a nomadic steppe civilization, featuring plenty of similarities to civs like Mongols, Tatars, and even Huns. One of the kookiest civilizations in AoE2, the Cumans possess some very unique bonuses, most notable of which is the second TC that can be built in the feudal age. In a similar vein to Chinese, this really changes how you develop your economy with this civilization, as the decision of when to add that second TC without dying to enemy pressure or delaying your castle age too much is really the crux of Cuman gameplay in the early game. However, you also get some other fun toys to play with in the feudal age, such as the ability to make siege workshops and battering rams before anyone else, as well as your cheaper stables and archery ranges. Extra HP for your palisade walls help make up for the civ's lack of stone walls, and is typically an important tool in helping the Cuman player make it to the castle Age. If the Cuman player can make it to the mid-game, their options will open up even more, as the faster-moving cavalry helps swiftly transition them into knights, camels, or steppe lancers. At the castle, the Kipchak is a unique cav archer that is cheap, easy to micro, and able to snowball an advantage. Even Castle Age cap rams can aid in breaking an enemy position. As you reach the late game, Cumans have a few strong options as well in paladins, halberdiers, and siege onagers. Also, special shout out to steppe husbandry for allowing you to churn out tons of horsemen. Of course, Cumans have their downsides, most notably their situational economy, lack of gunpowder, and lack of the bracer technology. I'll speak more to the situational nature of their economy in just a second, but the lack of gunpowder and bracer can really limit you in a variety of settings, as strong ranged options typically become limited to Kipchaks, who themselves are pretty mediocre in post-imp. It can just become very difficult to take efficient fights with this civ in the late game. Now, last year I placed Cumans in the major changes needed tier, because honestly, things felt pretty clunky. Their extra town center in the feudal age can be so incredibly powerful, but it's entirely dependent on you going for a specific strategy, which feels pretty limiting and simply not viable in many situations. Without that strong economy from the second TC, you're left with no economy bonus and a mediocre tech tree, which doesn't feel great. Kipchaks can be very strong early on and when in a large mass, but the lack of bracer and low base damage means these guys feel like they're shooting nerf darts in the late game, making them terrible to transition into. Then you have Cuman mercenaries, which is a one-time benefit technology, and I just feel those don't have a place in AoE2. In my opinion, all technology should have some sort of permanent positive effect. On top of that, the one-time effect was pretty useless as the chances of your teammates needing extra Kipchaks was very low. And that brings us to the Cumans today. In the past year, this civ has received one balance change, and to be fair, it was to somewhat rework Cuman mercenaries. It used to be a one-time ability to train 10 free elite Kipchaks, whereas now you can train 5 free elite Kipchaks for every castle you or your teammates have. This makes the tech a little bit better, but I still feel that it needs to be reworked. Similarly, I don't think things have changed enough with the Cumans for me to bump them up from the major changes needed tier. The second TC and feudal age bonus feels pretty limiting and clunky, and in my opinion, this would be a good opportunity to introduce a new unique villager training building instead. Kipchaks could also use another pass, as can Cuman mercenaries. Still, the general idea of the sprawling steppe nomad nature of the Cumans does feel unique and engaging, there just needs to be more iterating on its implementation. And with that, we have completed week 2 of our Civ reviews. No changes in any Civ positions from last year to today, but I still think it's important to take stock and see where all of the Civs are right now. I'll continue to try and release these once a week every Friday until we eventually get through all 42 Civs in the game. I'm honestly enjoying these shorter videos as they're easier to work on and get out to you guys, and I don't feel as rushed when talking about each Civ. Lastly, I do want to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, with Tristan in the Great Wolf tier, and then Elvinor, Carolyn, and Donnie in the Dire Wolf tier. If you are interested in supporting my channel further and getting some extra perks, the link to my Patreon is always in the description. But of course, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.